Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Martha from Martha Is. Today's video I really wanted to call out a range of books which are focusing on anti-racism and the experience of predominantly black people but also people of colour generally. The reason that I want to do that is over the weekend we've seen a lot happening around in response to the recent murder of George Floyd in Minnesota by a police officer. And the general resurgence in resurgence is the wrong word. Black Lives Matter has always been there. So it's not resurgence, it's not like they went quiet. But, there are a lot of protests going on right now. And it's the realisation that actually I have not been vocal enough by any stretch of the imagination. And I need to work on my understanding of what it means to be a white person, how I've been complicit in the structures that uphold racism. So, and my privilege and my white privilege and all of that. That is something that I need to do, and that is something that I need to tell you that you need to do. I imagine a lot of my followers are white people. So we need to take responsibility for this. We need to not expect people of colour to educate us. I've seen things on social media where people have said, I am here and I am happy to be educated. And that is such a privileged position to be in, that you are expecting to sit there and have someone else educate you. Nope, that is not okay. We need to start being proactive. Silence is the same thing as doing nothing, and that is the same thing as accepting racism, accepting the murder of people of colour, accepting their ongoing oppression. And it is not good enough. So it's not good enough to just be not racist. We need to be actively anti-racist. We need to be taking action. And so it is not good enough just to diversify your reading in terms of, okay, yes, I read a whole load of black authors last year. Cool. Then what happened? Like, yes, please do. It's really important to be promoting black authors, to be making space in publishing for them. That is essential, and we have to speak with our wallets in that sense. So we need to buy them and do. So I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that you're doing the wrong thing. But I'm saying that as someone who's done the same thing, I have been comforting myself that I have been increasing the number of authors of colour on my bookshelves and in my reading life. But what have I actually done? What have I actually done? What have I done to tackle racism? Have I ever called someone out who has said something racist? I don't think that I have. So this video, and I realise I'm saying this, and what I'm actually about to talk to you about is books again. So again, it's really important to read, to educate yourself, to not ask people of colour to educate you. So I'm going to give you a whole list of books, some of which are specifically about how to understand white privilege, how to understand your participation in racist structures, how to understand your bias. So some books about that. We also have some books which have a bit more of a kind of historical element about how racism has developed, how black people's lives have developed, how and also racism in things like science and stuff like that. And then I've got a shared load of books about black people's experiences right now, mainly in Britain actually, but also in the US. So I also want to say that, as I think I said at the beginning, predominantly a lot of these are around black authors and anti-black racism. But obviously, if you can understand your white privilege and all of that, that will impact people of all races and ethnicities and colours or whatever. And it's also really important to say that by pulling out all of these books now, I am not saying that people who aren't black don't experience racism. They do, 100%. So it's also really important to confront issues such as Islamophobia, for example, because that, people who are Muslim tend to also be from BAME communities. So I'm talking myself in knots. Today's video is predominantly focusing on black authors and black history, but don't let that stop you from going elsewhere, and I will at some point do another video with other books. Yes, I've rambled for 5 minutes, and I have a fuck ton of books. So let's get moving. So starting with the specific anti-racism part. So the first book I have is in my bedroom, and I didn't get it. So I'm just going to put a picture up here. It's Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad. So that is a critical book, and I think actually it's now sold out everywhere. So keep checking to try and get hold of a copy. And also the author Layla Saad has said, please make a donation to the Minnesota Freedom Fund if you also buy her book, because her and some of the other authors said they don't want to profit off what is happening right now. But the book, Me and White Supremacy, it is a workbook. So it's been described as a book that you do, not a book that you read. And what it is, it has daily prompts. So it's basically a 30-day course of daily prompts to take you through concepts such as racism, privilege, white fragility, white superiority. There's so many. I've only got to the end of the first week, and I will concede that I stopped because the pandemic hit and I decided now's not the time to confront racism. But that is because I have privilege. And as we can see with everything that's happening in Minnesota right now, people are going out and protesting because they have to, because their lives depend on it, even though we are still in a pandemic. So I'm going to get back on to reading that and continuing on with the course. But everything that I've read so far in terms of the first week full of prompts, I found it incredibly interesting. Yes, it is uncomfortable. Yes, you have to really interrogate yourself. Do it in private. You don't have to do it publicly. Do it privately. Really understand yourself and how you can be better. So that's just book number 1. Book number 2 is White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. So Robin DiAngelo is a white woman, but I think in this case this is still that is a good thing, because it is a white woman talking to other white people about how white people respond to being called out for racism. So I haven't read this one, but I think I am going to read this one this month. And I've got friends who read it and said it is very powerful and very helpful in understanding, because white fragility is essentially that moment of complete defensiveness where like a white person is confronted by something that they have done that is racist, and they get very defensive, very aggressive, very angry, because it's because they are feeling fragile about it. So that's White Fragility. Another one we have is, this book is AntiRacist, so it's another one I haven't read. And actually, guys, the majority of these books I haven't read, which in itself is a problem. I have basically been hoarding all of these books and not reading them. This book is AntiRacist is, I believe, geared more towards families and children. So it's 20 lessons on how to wake up, take action and do the work. So I picked this up and I flicked through it and you look, and it's really colourful and awesome. So I think this one could be a really interesting and quite sort of accessible read. So this book is AntiRacist by Tiffany Jewell. This one, Biased by Jennifer L. Eberhardt, Uncovering the Hidden Prejudices that Shape Our Lives. So this one I don't believe is confined to racism specifically. Or maybe it is, because it gives the example of black drivers being stopped more often than white drivers, etc. But that doesn't matter anyway. So this is just another text about understanding your own bias and your own unconscious bias, because so much of it is so deeply ingrained that you're not necessarily aware of it. And that's what we have to do, this process of unlearning, this process of bringing all of that up to the fore and being aware of it, so that you can catch yourself when these things happen, because they will continue to happen. You're not going to become a perfect person overnight. And then we have How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. Sorry, this is I think this is a proof copy. So this one I found thank you to the Stacks Pod, who I will link down below. So she was raving about this book and she did an interview with the author. So this one I think is, How to Be an Anti-Racist, does what it says on the tin. So then I want to look at a section of books which are, as I said, more around kind of black history, the history of colonialism, etc., etc. So the first one which I have on Kindle is British by Afua Hirsch. I think I read this about 18 months ago, and it's absolutely fantastic. So Afua Hirsch is a British journalist, and she has been very vocal, particularly about Britain's colonial history. And in her book, she draws on personal experiences of being a biracial woman, of trying to, I guess, understand her identity and her place in the world when she is half black, half, I think, white Jewish. And so she was born in Britain, but people will still ask her, where are you from? And so she spends time in Britain. She thinks she investigates the colonial history. So she went to Oxford, I think it's Oxford University, and there's a statue of Rhodes, who was a massive colonialist, racist figure in history. She spends time in Ghana, because I think her heritage is part Ghanaian, so she's trying to understand how that feels, exploring that side of her identity. I found it absolutely so fascinating, so interesting, so I would highly, highly recommend that. And she also does a podcast. If you have an Audible subscription, there's an Audible original podcast, which is, again, interviewing people about Britain's colonial history and how that history is still impacting things today. So that's British. Another one you probably won't be surprised to see if you've watched my videos before is AfroPon by Johnny Pitts, which I have been going on and on about for like the last month. So this recently won the Jalak Prize, which is a prize that recognises people of BAME descent who are British born or British resident. And this is particularly about it says notes from Black Europe, so it's exploring the idea of an almost combined African and European identity, and really looking at people who are black living in countries such as France and where else, Russia, I think he went to Sweden. So it's fascinating. I have never read a book like this, so highly, highly recommend that. Then we have Blacklisted, so this is one I haven't read, but bought recently. So in terms of the blurb, this is an exploration of 21st century black identity told through a list of insults, insights, and everything in between, taking a panoramic look at global black history and contemporary culture. This book investigates the ways in which black communities and individuals have been represented, oppressed, mimicked, celebrated, and othered. So it's Blacklisted. Then we have one which I have read, which is Natives by Akala. So Natives is kind of in similar ways to British, has a whole thing about colonialism, so race and class in the ruins of the empire. So it talks a lot about empire. It's also part autobiographical, and so Akala is also someone who is biracial, so understanding, he talks about when he was very, very young, realising that his mother was white and what that meant and how that felt. So this one is a fantastic one. It's another one that I've read, would really recommend. I feel like I'm just going to keep going up with this pile. And then another one, it's kind of about history, but it's more particularly about science. So this is Superior by Angela Saini. So this is about the return of race science. So this isn't exclusively about blackness, but it's just about race science generally. And it's I've heard it described as kind of really debunking the myths about race being kind of genetic, or racial inequality almost being genetically driven and biologically driven, rather than kind of a political and social creation. Another one I haven't read, but that looks really fascinating. And then one for a younger audience, which I absolutely love, is called Young, Gifted and Black. So this is part of the category of books that have been coming out a lot over the last few years, which is where you have you're profiling people from history, so like similar to the kind of Goodnight Stories of Rebel Girls, etc. But this is focusing specifically on black people, and I absolutely love this one. It's also massive. Try not to drop it. I love, just on the one hand, just how colourful it is. So it's just gorgeous, and so you've got people that you probably recognise: Louis Armstrong, Rosa Parks, Nelson Mandela, Oprah Winfrey. So there's generally quite well-known people in here, but there's also more recent people like Simone Biles, sorry, I don't know how you say her last name. People I hadn't heard of, like Maurice Ashley, or Yannick Noah. So yeah, this is a really fantastic one, I think, for kids and for adults, if you just want something really accessible. I mean, I flipping love all books like this. And, you know, I think it's really important for young black children to be able to see all the amazing black people in history who otherwise might not get talked about. But also for children of any other race, again, to be showing the same thing, to show that, you know, how much black people achieve and have achieved. And yeah, so there's that one. So then the next category of books I have is more around the kind of experience today, again predominantly of black people but not exclusively. So the first one I want to talk about is one which I don't own but have read, which is called Between the World and Me, by Ta-Nehisi Coates. So Ta-Nehisi Coates is an American man, and this book is essentially like a long, well, it's not long, it's a very short book. It's a letter to his son and talking about the experience of being a black man in America today. So it was written, I don't know, 3-4 years ago. I remember reading it and just being absolutely floored by the lyricism of his language, and it was a combination of this lyrical language but also so visceral, because it's so much about body, because racism is so much about body, because it is black bodies who are being, you know, broken and injured and murdered. And so yeah, it was just this incredible combination of this incredibly lyrical language but this really visceral sense of body and what it meant to be black. And so really bringing it down from being any sort of like intellectual discussion to something very, very real, and the very, very real impact of it. And I mean, I need to reread it because it's one of those books that there's just so much in there that you've forgotten most of it as soon as you read it. But the one thing that has always stuck with me is he describes whiteness as the dream, and that's just so spot on. So it's the dream that we don't want, and white people, we do not want to wake up from the dream. And being called out on racism and understanding our own privilege and our own complicity in racist structures is like being rudely awakened from this perfect dream. And that, yes, that's not to say that white people all have perfect lives, because we don't. You can be disadvantaged in other ways, but the point is you're not additionally disadvantaged because of your skin colour. And it is so hard to want to wake up to that reality. And that is why you get things like white fragility, why white people can become very aggressive and defensive, and I certainly have been in the past, because it's that almost like subconscious wrestling of desperately not wanting to wake up from this dream and realise how bad things are and what our role is in that. So I highly recommend that book. The second one, which I have on my Kindle, which I'm sure a lot of you would have heard of, is Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Reni Eddo-Lodge. So I think that's another one that might even be sold out everywhere. I'm not, I think, at the moment. And also another one where Reni Eddo-Lodge has said specifically that she doesn't want to profit from what is happening. So please also make donations, buy the book and make a donation to the Minnesota Freedom Fund. But that is another, so that is another book about the experience of racism, or particularly anti-black racism in the UK. Specifically, it's another one that I read a couple of years ago and is something that I also really want to reread. She also did a podcast after the book called About Race, and I think you could probably listen to that without having read the book. You do both. I remember the podcast, some of the things really stayed with me. She kind of debunks the whole idea of the white working class, because commonly in Britain, because we are a very classist society, you quite often hear defences of, or whenever kind of moves are made to try and bust the barriers that black people experience, you suddenly hear this, oh, but what about the white working class? The white working class being left behind. And it's actually debunking a lot of that. In I think one or two of the episodes, she was talking a lot about that and how actually that is a bit of a myth, because race and class are so intrinsically interlinked. If you look at a lot of the data, yes, there are white working class people, but there are also black working class people, and black people are more likely to be in poverty. So yeah. So then we've got more. So we have I Will Not Be Erased by Galdem. So Galdem is a magazine, I believe, and this is a collection of stories about growing up as people of colour. I'm not completely clear if they're memoirs or fiction, or possibly both. Not completely clear, but I mean, either way, the main point is still there about, you know, stories about growing up as people of colour. And I think this is possibly more, because it is about young people, I think it is possibly geared more towards a younger audience, so like YA. Then we have one which I bought very recently, The Space Between Black and White, by Esuansua Jane Goldsmith. So this is one of the of Jacaranda's 20 in 2020 project, where publisher Jacaranda, they have committed to publishing 20 Black British authors in 2020. So this is a memoir, and it's about being raised in 1950s South London and Norfolk with a white working class family. Esua's education in racial politics was immediate and personal. From Britain and Scandinavia to Italy and Tanzania, she tackled inequality where she saw it, establishing an inspiring legacy in the women's lib and black power movements. Plagued by questions of her heritage and the inability to locate all pieces of herself, she embarks on a journey to Ghana to find the father who may have the answers. So, so that sounds really interesting. Again, one I haven't read. One that is, I think, particularly timely right now is When They Call You a Terrorist, by Patrice Khan Cullors and Asha Bandili. So Patrice Khan Cullors, I think particularly, is the one of the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement. So if we look at everything that's happening right now with the protests, particularly in Minnesota, but in other areas, this is really important, because you can already see the media narrative is essentially that these people are violent protesters, and actually they're not. There's so many peaceful protesters, and I would urge you to seek out the information that is online. If you look on like social media, for example, so there's an amazing bookstagrammer called Jessie, who is at Bow Ties and Books, that I will link down below. They have been part of the Minnesota protesters. They've been attending the Minnesota protests and calling out so much how they have been peaceful protests, and yet police will turn up, and it's the police who are committing the violence. So the police who are firing tear gas at them, police who are coming armed with rifles. There's lots of talk about it's white supremacists who are turning up to these protests and starting the violence, to incite the violence. So I would also just urge you to question, whenever you see things in the media about these violent protests, question it. Question what you're being told. But so this is a really good place to start as well. Again, I haven't read it. One I have read, The Good Immigrant, edited by Nikesh Shukla. So this is absolutely one of my favourite non-fiction books, generally. But this is a really, 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 really useful book, particularly if you are British. So it's a set of essays by people, by BAME people. So this is not only black people, so it's black, Asian and minority ethnic people in Britain today. 21 essays about their experiences and about the whole concept of what it means to be the good immigrant. And this opened my eyes so much, and that was years ago. I can't sing this book's praises enough. This is such a revolutionary book, and I would really urge all people to read it. I would also really recommend the audiobook, so I've listened to that as well, because all of the writers read their own essays, which I think like adds an extra kind of layer to help you understand it. So this one is just absolutely fantastic. Highly, highly recommend that. And actually, since that was written, Nikesh Shukla has partnered with Shemaine Suleiman, and they curated an equivalent for the USA. So this is 21 writers about race and immigration in America. So haven't read this one yet, but this one would be another really good option. So we've got two more. So the next one, sorry, I've got really itchy nose. The next one is Safe, on Black British men reclaiming space. So this is another collection of essays edited by Derek Ahuzo, and I think, and this is another thing that's really important, because there's so many black men who are being killed, and it's not only men who are being killed, but so many black men who are being killed, and there's this whole thing about black men being seen as intrinsically dangerous, which is, you know, this really racist stereotype. So I think understanding that, so this is from a black British perspective, but you know, it's certainly the case not just only in Britain, but so this is a really important one to be reading. And then the final book I have is Mother Country, edited by Charlie Brinkhurst Cuff. So again, another book of essays, which is specifically about the children of the Windrush generation. So the Windrush generation were people who were kind of part of, I think Windrush was a boat. I should know this, and I do not. And this is another one I've read. But they were coming over, particularly from the Caribbean, I think, because that was part of the British Empire, and so they were British citizens. But obviously, in that time, so they came over. They didn't. They don't necessarily have like God, what am I trying to say? Like papers. Someone was saying it's a really outdated expression, like, you know, passports and things like that. And it was not long ago that the hostile environment policies of the government meant that these people were then getting deported back to countries that they hadn't been to in 20, 30, 40 years. And even their children were getting deported to countries that they'd never been to, because they were suddenly being labelled as illegal immigrants. So the Windrush generation, I think that's another really important kind of area of British history to be thinking about, to be interrogating. So there's that one. So that is, I know this has been a really long video. Sorry, I don't know why my nose is so itchy. I know this has been a really long video. What I wanted to do was to show you just the vast range of books that there are. So, you know, start somewhere. One of those hopefully has taken your interest. Buy it, read it, just start. There's so many. And again, to reinforce, you don't need to be asking people of colour to educate you, because look, there's book, they're already doing it. You know, there's books, there's so many books. And just to say again that just reading the book and not doing anything about what you've learned is not enough. And also, I'm saying this basically to myself, the majority of these books I've talked to you about today, I haven't read them. I am a book hoarder. You can see the shelves behind me. I basically have like 600 unread books. But so I am someone who just keeps buying them. And I think to myself, oh yeah, sure, I definitely read diversely. But actually, do I read diversely or do I just buy diversely? So that's definitely a challenge to myself. I will be picking up Me and White Supremacy again, getting on into week 2. I think we're going to be reading White Fragility as part of the Do the Work book club, which I will link down below. But just start. You cannot stay silent anymore. We've stayed silent for too long. Just do something. If you've enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. Please subscribe to my channel. Please share this video. Share it particularly with other white people, to show them how easy it is to just start. And if you've got any other recommendations, please share them with me in the comments down below. I've also collated a list of more general resources, not just books, on my blog, which I will link down below. And none of them are mine, but I have credited all the sources. So I will link that down below. Check that out if it's, if you're not able to read a book or you don't want to read a book, there's other things you can do. And I think that's it. I know this has been a really long video, but thank you for sticking with me. And please come back soon. And I hope I will see you again soon for another video. Bye!